RT is in San Francisco sitting down with Eric Garris, director and founder of Antiwar.com, a daily global news source which attracts as many as 1 million page views a week. Eric, thank you very much for sitting down with us today.
Thank you for having me.
So my first question to you is, for those who are not familiar with your website, briefly, what is it all about?
It's really the only place where you can go and find out what's going on with war issues. Especially in the last 2 years, there's been very, very little coverage of what's really going on in Afghanistan and Iraq in the mainstream media.
How many wars, if we talk about just the United States, is America involved in right now?
Well, it depends on what you consider a war. We haven't declared war since 1941, but we have war in Afghanistan, we have the war in Iraq, we are engaged in military activities, drone strikes, etc., in Somalia, in Yemen, in Pakistan, and increasing the number of countries around the world.
How big is the scope of the interventions that the United States is involved in?
Well, the United States government likes to use the word war whenever they're talking about intervention, whether they're talking about the war on inflation, their war on drugs, the war on illiteracy. They like to use these militarized terms. But certain wars, like the war on drugs, really are wars. They are wars on the American people. And in California here, for example, there are more people in prison than anywhere else in the world, and half of the people in prison are in prison for drugs. California's got a terrible economic climate, and the reason is they're spending so much money on unnecessary things like keeping nonviolent offenders in prison.
Now, you've mentioned that Iraq and Afghanistan are not really covered by the media lately. What is it that's not being covered at this point?
Well, since Barack Obama was elected, we've seen a lot less attention to the wars. The anti-Bush atmosphere that was around, that was focusing on the wars, has disappeared, and now most people don't even realize that we still have 90,000 American troops in Iraq. We have over 100,000 troops in Afghanistan, and that number is going to be going up. They don't see that this is what's causing the problems with the economy. We're spending trillions and trillions of dollars of American money, and we're killing people, Americans, and killing people in other countries, and not accomplishing anything.
Why do you think people have become more silent when it comes to these wars? Are they expecting that Barack Obama will actually put an end to them?
I think that a lot of people assumed that Obama was an anti-war candidate, even though when he was running, he said that he was going to escalate the war in Afghanistan. He did promise to withdraw troops from Iraq, but it doesn't look like he's going to come anywhere close to his deadline for withdrawal of the 40,000 troops that he's pledged to withdraw, and he's planning on keeping 50,000 troops there for an indefinite period of time. I think that people don't realize that we are still there, and we are still there in force.
Earlier you mentioned the amounts of money that the U.S. spends on the war in Afghanistan, and many politicians say, oh well, the United States has enough money to spend.
We're spending more money on the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq and elsewhere than we lost in the economic collapse, than we've lost in lost jobs. If we got out of Afghanistan and got out of Iraq and brought American troops home and started focusing on domestic issues, we would have a much better economic situation. We do not have the money to just keep spending and spending.
Your website often refers to the United States as an empire. Can you explain why?
Well, the United States is a more modern type of empire. It's not so much mercantilist as ideological. We feel like we need to advance democracy, our brand of democracy, to all the other countries. And the United States is now trying to dictate to virtually every other country what they should do with their own societies and with their own people. And we think that it's none of the U.S. business.
Now, you've actually said that none of the U.S. interventions have achieved their initial goal. Can you be more specific using the latest examples?
Well, for example, in Afghanistan, our initial goal was to go after the people who committed 9/11, ignoring the fact that they were not planned in Afghanistan. They were planned in Germany and Britain and the United States. But even so, General McChrystal, who's just been ousted, said recently that he doesn't think there are any al-Qaeda members left in Afghanistan. Yet that is the reason that most Americans think that we're still there. What happens is they sell it for one reason, just like they did with Iraq. It was weapons of mass destruction. But once we got in there, the reason for us being there changed. And it continues to change. We keep having new goals, but none of these goals are really achievable, and so they just keep creeping up through the system.
Now, in how many countries are U.S. troops actually present currently?
We have troops in 130 countries. The current regime in the United States feels like it needs to run everything, that if they do not tell every country what they need to do and use both the carrot and the stick approach, that they are going to lose their influence. It's 130 countries. There are thousands of bases.
What kind of percentage of what actually goes on does the mainstream media actually discuss?
Very little. The facts that are presented are very, very superficial, and the analysis that's presented is usually two sides of how we should accomplish the same thing. Everybody's talking about, is this going to be good for the war, without talking about whether or not we should be in this war.
Do you think it's possible that within the next decade there will come a time where the United States is not involved in military warfare? Or how long do people have to wait?
Well, I think that the thing that's going to come to a head is the money, because we are going to run out of money, and they're going to have to start figuring out what to cut. Are they going to cut Social Security, or are they going to cut troops in Afghanistan? Are they going to cut the police at home, or are they going to cut the police around the world? They will have to pull back, but when that happens, I'm not sure.
On your website, what are the most popular war-related topics that people want to discuss and be able to talk about?
I would say it somewhat depends what's going on. Certainly Afghanistan and Iraq are issues, but they're not as sexy issues these days as, say, Iran or Israel. You know, you have Iran, where the United States, as well as its allies around the world, are ratcheting up pressure and threatening war. I assume that at some point or another, either Israel or the United States is going to initiate an attack on Iran. And that's going to be very, very disastrous, because that's the sort of thing that could really come back in terms of blowback, the kind of blowback that 9/11 was.
You think that's something that could realistically happen soon?
I think it could, especially if the United States keeps doing what they're doing. I mean, the Times Square bomber, although that was an unsuccessful attempt, he said that the reason he did it was because of the U.S. drone strikes in Pakistan, and you're going to see more and more of this sort of blowback.
If we talk about the attack on the flotilla carrying humanitarian aid to Gaza, were you satisfied with the way the United States reacted and handled to that situation?
No, absolutely not. First of all, the United States has no business dictating to any country in the Middle East what they should or should not be doing. But we give billions of dollars a year to Israel and let them do virtually anything without criticism. Gaza is basically a prison. It's like a prison camp. They're virtually trying to starve the Palestinians in Gaza in order to drive them away. And the United States is perfectly satisfied with an uncritical support of Israel. I think that the Gaza aid ships, I hope that there are many more ships that come, because the Gazans need it. 60% of children under the age of 1 in Gaza are anemic. 85% are below the poverty line. 60% are below the age of 18. It's mostly kids, and we're starving them to death.
Eric Garris, thank you very much for your time with us today.